Welcome to Right on Track, a songwriting podcast. Thanks to Tone for tuning in. I'm Demi Michelle Schwartz, and I'm thrilled you're joining me on my songwriting journey. So kick back and relax, don't fall flat, and remember, stay right on track. Hey everyone, welcome back to Right on Track. I am thrilled to have Marcus Reeves joining me today. Hey Marcus.
Hi, I feel like I'm on the radio. This is really exciting.
Perfect. I love the vibe of this show, and just as an artist myself, I love radio interviews and podcast interviews, so I'm happy you feel that way. I'm so excited you're here today because we're going to be chatting all about songwriting and consistency, and I can't wait to get into our conversation. But before we get into all of that, can you share with the listeners a little about yourself and some career highlights so far?
Sure. So I'm based in London in the UK, and I was thinking about this the other day. I've been writing now for about 30 years, which is slightly scary. And we're going to be talking about a project that I've been doing for the last 9 months in a little while, but it's made me really reflect on. Uh, I'm glad you used the word highlights because I think there's a tendency in our culture to only think about success and be obsessed with success and monetary gain being our maker of success. But in terms of highlights, I think for me, um, I've written a musical, I've written and released an album which I co-produced. Those were real highlights for me, just having an idea and being able to see it through and share it with other people. Now, by other people's metrics, they may not have earned me a great deal of money, but personally, it was satisfying to complete those projects. Um, and then also, there's been other highlights, because I think a lot about this. I did a live show of my album, and I don't know if you've experienced this. I expect a lot of independent artists experience it. You get really excited about your event, and at some point, usually a really inopportune moment, you think, God, this is costing me so much money, and it kind of bursts the bubble of your excitement. And I did a big show, and someone came up to me afterwards and they said, "Oh, I just found out about this in the paper at the last moment, and thought it looked so cool, and I came along and I'd noticed this person in the audience. She was in the front row, and she was in tears at certain points, and I was kind of like, I almost sort of was like, 'Are you okay?' I really wanted to stop and ask her, and then she said, 'Oh, can I have a hug because this meant so much to me?' And I was like,
Aww.
wow, yeah, and I really felt, and I that's 10 years ago, and I still remember it because I kind of think, that's really what we're trying to achieve here, um, Grammys and millions of dollars and pounds and wealth would be nice, but at the same time, it's when you get reminded that you have touched people emotionally. I think that is a real highlight.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love all the highlights you shared. And also, too, I think it's really important to think about these highlights and celebrate them from time to time because
Yeah,
it's an uphill battle being a songwriter. And so I think when we can reflect on the highlights and the great moments we had, it reminds us that we are getting somewhere, even though sometimes it can feel like we're hitting walls.
definitely. I think most people, unless they're very lucky to come from a very wealthy background or they have some financial success early on in their career, we all have other jobs and things that we have to do to keep going. And every so often, I kind of get very frustrated, and I've had various mentors along the way who've encouraged me to update my biography or do some sort of timeline of my achievements, and I think that's really helpful in terms of what you're saying about celebrating your achievements and highlights, because it may not be something that you share publicly, but often I'll go, if I'm having a period where I'm sort of doubting myself, I'll go back to that and think, wow, he sounds impressive, and then I'll sort of be like, no, that's me, and remind myself of some of the things that I've managed to do, that I've forgotten about. Um, so I think you're right, it is important. I don't think that necessarily means in a boastful way, but just to remind yourself of where you've come from and what you've managed to achieve along the way, whether that's a big thing or a small thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, I do share mine publicly on my website, on my blog. I share monthly wraps where at the end of every month, I'll recap all the fun moments I had that month. And I started doing this a couple years ago. And it's been amazing to do that because there were some months that went by where I was like, literally nothing happened. And then I put that together and I'm like, yeah, like 10 things happened. So it's a great reminder for me and also for people who follow me to stay up to date with everything going on. So yeah, highlights, recognizing them, super, super important.
I don't know whether you know this, but it's actually you've actually borrowed I did a bit of what we call here CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's designed for people, with low mood or depression, and one of the exercises that they asked us to do was to find three things every day that were an achievement or made us happy. And the idea is to make you realize that even on a day where you feel really hopeless, three things, there are always three things. And very quickly you realize there's more than three things. And
Hmm.
it could be as simple as I got out of bed today and had a bath, if you're in a really low place, or I had some nice cake, or I watched TV. Really simple things. But what part of what you're doing as well is amplifying that, which I think is really, really useful. I may have to borrow that idea, Debbie.
You totally should. Awesome. So now let's shift gears into our quote, which is a fantastic one by Dwayne Johnson, aka The Rock.
Yeah. Success isn't always about greatness, it's about consistency. Consistent hard work leads to success. Greatness will come.
So why did you resonate with this one?
Well, I think to me, it reminded me of music practice. Part of the process that I've been going through, I've been revisiting skills that I maybe didn't apply myself to when I was a lot younger. And now I think, without sounding like an old codger, I sort of think when you're younger, you know, and because a lot of people pick up music when they're children, and it's often things that they're encouraged to do by their parents. And a lot of kids, there are lots of kids who want to play the clarinet or the violin or whatever, but most kids are more interested in whatever's cool at the time, whether that's DJing or playing the guitar or singing or whatever. But I think you only really learn to apply yourself when you're enjoying what you're doing. But with any practice, there's an early period where you're just terrible at it, and it feels like, oh, I don't want to do this because I suck. Um, and what he's talking about, consistency. If you keep practicing your scales, eventually you get to a point where you can play it, and then you can use that scale to do something more interesting. So I think whether it's building up massive muscles or massive musical muscles, I think he's right, and you do have to kind of plug away at these things even when they don't feel fun every day, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you brought up, the musical muscles because it's the same thing. Like, if you want to get fit, you got to go to the gym.
Yeah.
And so it's like the same kind of thing. Like, whatever you're doing in life, you need to work at it. And, I grew up the same way with, I was classically trained and I never liked practicing with a metronome and I hated doing my scales. But my teachers and my professor in college was like, you have to practice your scales and practice with the metronome and all that. And so I think that growing up, I had that mentality of you have to practice. You're not going to play a Mozart sonata right at the beginning. But I eventually got there. I did play a whole Mozart sonata. And so that's something to keep in mind. And the other thing, too, is I think with consistency is we live in a time where people want instant gratification.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to, music and anything in life, if you're just starting, if you have a passion to start a new craft or go down a different career path, you're not going to have success right away. You need to work for it. And sometimes it can be very frustrating. And if you're a little impatient like me, it can be a little, getting under your skin a little bit. But it's definitely part of being a songwriter and being an artist. We need to work at a craft all the time and grow and being consistent and showing up even when we're not inspired necessarily. Showing up and practicing the craft is very important.
About gosh, yeah, no, it was about 8 years ago, maybe. I was scouted for The Voice, the UK version of The Voice, and I've always been very anti these sort of competition talent shows. In my preparation for chatting to you today, I wrote down creativity shouldn't be competitive, which I think to me should be. I should put it on a t-shirt. I do believe that, and I really didn't when they first approached me, because at that time I was doing music and I wore a lot of sort of flamboyant costumes and I looked very interesting. I looked more interesting than I do now, anyway. And so I really felt like I was being approached as a kind of freak of the week to put on this program, and I didn't like the idea. And I went to the audition, and I found they were actually very respectful, and I didn't get through any further than the first audition, which was fine. It wasn't something that really interested me anyway. But it really brought home to me that throughout my career, I've always felt that in many ways I've been too weird for normal people and too normal for weird people. Now we could go into my definitions of normal and weird for weeks, but it made me really think about the kind of people who I admire. And at that time, I was starting to listen to John Grant, and he'd recorded an album. He'd been working in the '90s and the 2000s on music, and had some attention and some small success, but then had his own personal problems to deal with, and kind of left the industry, but was kind of in the background. And a band called Midlake kind of rediscovered him and made him record an album with them. And now he's had this real kind of cultural renaissance where he's got a huge back catalog of material, and he's very well respected. And I kind of thought, do I want to go down a route where I have put two singles out and get 1 million plays because I've paid a marketing company to get them for me, and I spend a load of money on a music video? Or do I carry on my own path, and hopefully maybe in 15 years I've then got a huge back catalogue of work that I can lean on and people can discover. So I think whether that plan works or not, we don't know. And it's already 15 years later, or nearly 15 years later. But I think longevity is something that we're not encouraged to think about, and in terms of there being a long-term career, also partly because the financial returns are so small now, and to keep going you really have to keep the faith, because the money isn't going to keep you interested, so
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love how you said, like, the longevity of it. That's exactly right. When you have some kind of goal, you want that to be a long-term goal. And there are people who were one-hit wonders. Like, they blew up, everybody knew their name for 1 or 2 years, and then they fell off the face of the earth. And that's not what I want either. And so I think consistency is a big part of, putting in the work in the craft side and on the networking side, and just anything possible you can do to take steps forward and hopefully see that great success in the future. That's definitely a goal here. But I want to shift gears and chat about your amazing project you have going on, which is 10-Day Tunes. So can you share a little about
10
that?
day tunes. Yeah, so I wrote an album. Well, I wrote some of the album quite a long time ago. I released this album 10 years ago. It's called Quicksilver, The Masquerade Macabre. So it got a very grandiose title. And there's some grandiose moments, but there's some quite straightforward kind of rock and pop on there as well. And like most artists, I was really invested in that project for a good 5 years. And I wrote a musical that I worked on for 15 years. And I was beginning to get a bit burnt out really in terms of my writing. And it felt very much like you hear a lot of people say, oh, I can only write when I'm in the right frame of mind, and when the inspiration comes to me. And I was very much in that mode, which meant I didn't write anything ever. I one The last single I put out, which is called Mr. Happy, that was the only song I wrote in about 3 years. And I was beginning to feel very uncomfortable because I was thinking, here's this thing that I really enjoy. I do lots of different things. I'm a songwriter, singer, and an actor. And if you said to me, if you can only do one of those things, it would come down to the songwriting, because it really, I see it as puzzle solving, and that's how I view it in my head. And I find that really satisfying in a way that I find other things satisfying, but this is my main thing that I will always want to do. And so it was beginning to kind of feel uncomfortable that I wasn't doing the thing that I supposedly was so passionate about. And it was shortly after I released the album, so I was aware of it for a long time. There's an artist here called Christopher Green, who again I've called Christopher the David Bowie of comedy, because Christopher does all sorts of different things: character comedy, plays, radio, and music. They just released their first album, and in 2014, Christopher did a project where they wrote a new song every week and called it 52 Fridays. And I thought, oh, that's a brilliant idea. And I was really impressed. And they write in a very different style to me. So it was interesting to hear the songs, and a lot of them being very personal. And I kept thinking, oh, I wish I could do something like that. I wish I could do something like that. And I crossed paths with Christopher a few times. I used to do a blog on my website, and I interviewed him for that. And then eventually, about 18 months, 2 years ago, as we were kind of coming out of COVID, where I've really been feeling like I've been stuck in my house for 18 months and I haven't written any songs, this is embarrassing. I thought, well, maybe I could do a version of Christopher's project. So I approached Christopher and said, may I have your permission to steal your idea, basically? And Christopher said yes. And I realized even then that trying to write one a week in the way that I write, and how, with all the commitments that I have, was going to be very difficult. So I changed it slightly to 10-day tunes and did a bit of planning, and then started in November last year. And now I'm 25 songs in, which is crazy. It feels really weird. Like when I started, it was sort of like, how long before I give this up? Talking about consistency, I really did think this is going to be like my new gym routine that I think about every 2.5 years. I really must start at the gym, and then you do it once and you never go again.
Yeah.
But no, I've managed to keep it up, and it's been really positive. I've really enjoyed it. There's been some challenging moments, mainly to do with time. But in terms of reconnecting with my creativity and the things that I wanted to get from it, it's really worked. I'd recommend it.
Awesome. No, I love this so much. I think it's such an interesting project, and also that you're forcing yourself to write consistently, which is really important. And also, you're rediscovering your love for songwriting and you're finding confidence in your creativity again. And I think that's amazing because you're not waiting for the inspiration, you're forcing yourself to write a song every 10 days and you're sharing it as well. And the other thing, too, that I love so much about this project is that you are allowing yourself to invest time into various songs on a frequent basis. And when I was looking at the press release, you mentioned different genres. Like, I'm a multi genre artist too. I love writing multi genre music. And that personally, for me, it keeps things creative. Like, if I just wrote a pop song and a pop song and a pop song, like, I'm going to get bored. And it's really awesome how you are writing various genres because that's keeping the process fresh and allowing you to explore different topics and different concepts and different vibes. And so that's just making you a better songwriter in the long run because you are developing your craft in many different areas and very consistently as well.
Yeah, I feel like since I started this, the world has changed a huge amount, and definitely along the way, various people have said, "Oh, why do you keep writing in different styles? It's really confusing." And I think, well, people that I admire, David Bowie, Madonna, they don't write in one style. Go away. And that has underlined this for me. I really don't know what's going to happen each week. um it kind of falls into a weekly cycle, really, because I end up having a day where I just don't think about it because I've had enough. And then by the time I actually get on with it, it's usually a week that I have to finish the whole thing. Um, yeah, it's almost like, right, what's going to fall out of the sky this week? And that's quite exciting. Even when it doesn't work, I'd say out of the 25, there's probably about 18 songs that I would like to continue with in some form. And even with there's two that are like total turkeys, that even in the I try and do a video each time where I talk to the people on Patreon who are sponsoring me, and say, this is how I wrote the song, this is what it's about, this is how I recorded the demo. And there's one where I just said, apologies, this is a terrible song. Um, but there's bits of the arrangement of the demo that I really liked, but just the lyrics were appalling. I just sort of like, this is embarrassing. But that's good because I think before someone once said I was very precious about my work, and I got really offended. And I thought, well, why wouldn't you be precious about your work? You want to do something good. But I kind of see what they meant now. And when you're writing and writing and writing, you become less precious. So before I went to art college and I never did sketchbooks, and every tutor, I'd have an idea and then I'd make it basically. And every tutor I had said, this is really bad practice. You need to do sketchbooks, you need to explore your ideas. And the arrogant 19-year-old was like, what do you mean I need to explore my ideas? My ideas are brilliant. Go away. Um, and now I kind of see what they meant, and I'm much less anxious or worried about writing a draft and then going, no, this is not working, and just starting again. And not I've kept a lot of my notes because I might do something with them, but at the same time I'm not sitting there thinking, oh, it has to be what fell out of the sky straight away, which was definitely how I used to work.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the things that I've learned with this is seeing these finished. The whole thing for me was about it being about the process, not the product. But unfortunately, the way I my brain works, and we live in a capitalist society, I am now thinking about these products, however many I might pursue, and what to do with them. And I'm very much seeing them as work in progress, which again is a different attitude for me. So it may be that if I record them and release them, that I will rewrite them, and that's fine.
Oh my gosh, so much you said is so amazing. I love how you had this shift in mindset and that you're recognizing that it's okay that not every song is good. And there's so many songs that I wrote that will literally never see the light of day. But I think what's really cool with what you're doing is you're showing this fearlessness and letting people see songs that you know yourself. This isn't that great. Like, but I did it. Like I showed up and I wrote the song, and you're working on those craft development skills and all that. But I think the big takeaway here is that, not every song we write is going to be a good one. And you're recognizing that. And you're also recognizing that, just because you stuck to that deadline and you wrote the song within that short period, that doesn't mean that that song's done and you can never do anything with it. You can definitely go back and revisit the ones that you think hold potential and do the necessary rewrites in order to get them ready for release, which I think is really, really important. And the other thing too that I really like is that this whole idea of pressure, because in a way you're putting pressure on yourself to release a new song every 10 days and write a song in that time frame. So that adds a little bit of pressure. But in the other sense, you're kind of taking the pressure off yourself because you're not focusing on this needs to be golden and nothing can be wrong with this. So it's an interesting situation where you're writing under pressure, which is a really good thing. And in that case, with me, like I tend to write better under pressure because I like to hyper focus on things, kind of like you, and like make sure everything's good and perfect. But when you're writing to a deadline, you can't really do that. Like I literally just wrote my Christmas single for this year. I write a new Christmas song and release it every year right after Thanksgiving. And so I was like stuck on this song for like ever, and I'm getting down to the wire because I need to record it. It needs to be ready for the holidays. And I gave myself a deadline to send the demo to my producer, and I had that deadline in mind. And within like an hour, I wrote the song when I've been struggling with it for months. And so having that deadline in place gave me pressure, but at the same time, I wasn't like, oh, maybe that lyric isn't good or maybe that melody's not good. And I love this song, and it's because I was allowing myself to be free with the whole thing.
I don't know if anyone's mentioned this on your podcast so far. I'd be surprised if no one hasn't mentioned it. Does that make sense? I expect someone has mentioned it. There's a thing called The Artist's Way. There's a book by a woman called Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way. I've not done it's like a 12-week program. I've not read the book or done the program, but the thing that I do have heard about and do as often as I can is this thing called morning pages, where as soon as you can, when you wake up, you write 3 pages of A4, what we call A4. I don't know what you call it in America, but lined paper by hand. And whatever is in your brain, from feed the cat to practice my Mozart sonata, to write my Christmas single, to I don't like my coworker because they need to buy deodorant. Whatever is in your head, you put on the page. And it's really interesting because it helps clear your mind in a way that is very hard to describe until you do it. It For me, I end up writing a list of what I need to do that day amongst the I don't like my coworker. It's odd, but what comes is that you end up in a very different state when you come to write, because often what comes out is better. So and faster. It's really strange. And I think after having done this for now 250 days, the last 3 or 4 songs that I've written, literally what I've written on the page has gone into the final song,
That's
when I
amazing.
come to sit down and write. And I think that's because I've got into a different flow, like creatively. And a mentor who I've been working with recently is a jazz singer and songwriter called Bridget Walsh, and she has this expression about making creativity welcome. So whether that's you've got your particular chair that you sit in, or you know that you write better in the evenings or the mornings, or you have a special place you go and sit in your shed or whatever, some not rituals, so it becomes I can only do this if I've done these things, and it becomes a weird control freak thing, but just taking and making time to give to your creativity so that it can then give something back to you. Basically, that sounds very hippy dippy, but I think it's true. And I
Yeah.
think that's definitely what I've been doing with this project. So if you say in 10 days I will give you a new song, you then have to make the time to make the song to give to your Patreon followers or your auntie or whoever it is you've made that pact with. So I think it's a combination of when it's been successful for me recently in terms of songs that I've been very happy with. There's been a combination of those things happening in tandem, which I think as well, it's very easy when we're independent artists to worry about what we're not achieving, in inverted commas, when actually we have a lot of artistic freedom and control that more established artists with big contracts with record companies just don't have. If I don't want to name names, but like if you took those big artists and they said, "I'm just going to write for a year," I expect their management and their agents would just their eyes would pop because they'd be like, "Well, you can't, you've got to go on tour. We've got all these T-shirts to sell." So it's felt very much. It's interesting what you pick up about there being sort of like yin yang sort of dichotomies of like pressure and not pressure, and it feels very much like within this project there's lots of things like that I'm free, but I've got responsibility, which you know that's when things happen in life, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I love everything you said. And also the whole thing about creating time for it. Like, there's so many people who may have a dream, but they say, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. And
Yeah,
then you keep
yeah,
procrastinating. And
yeah,
sooner or later, 5 years are going to go by and you didn't do a single thing to
yeah,
reach your goal. And so I love how you're creating the time and making the point that, like, set some time aside. If this is something you love to do, create the time for it. Make it a bigger priority in your life to create that consistent schedule, and also having the accountability for yourself, and being accountable to yourself and having others to hold you accountable to is really important as well, to create that responsibility and kind of the dependability as well to continue doing this and create the music, and know that I told somebody and I told myself and I promised myself I would do this, and so I'm going to do this. And the more you do that, you're going to get into a pattern where I'm sure at the beginning of this whole process, because you were in a place where you weren't really confident with your creativity, I'm sure you were in a place where it was difficult at times to write songs that quickly and you were second guessing and you weren't happy with the products or whatever. I'm sure that you're in a place where the flow is better, and you're recognizing that this consistency is creating a pattern for you where even if you're not in a super inspirational headspace, you're still creating, and that's really important.
yeah. It feels like if I was called upon to write with someone else, or I was involved in a project where they said we want a song about elephants tomorrow, I'd go, okay, I can do that.
Right.
Whereas before, I'd be like, oh my God, no, that's that. Because I've done that. Do you know what I mean? I've sat down and gone, right, I'm going to write a song about X, or I don't know what to write about. I'm just going to see what comes out. And then with most of these songs, I actually do most of the writing within a day or usually a day in actual time if you condense it. But I come back and take time out and come back to things. So yeah, it has totally transformed my relationship with being able to sort of write on demand. And I think that's not going to be everybody's process. I think that's what one of the things that this has brought to me is like finding the different ways that I write, and writing every 10 days might not work for some people. um I think it might be a good thing to try for some
Mhm.
people, but maybe not a year is a long time. I feel it feels fine at the moment. I think if I were to do it again, I might just give myself 6 months or something like that, or
Yeah.
say 10 songs or something like that. So it's
Yeah.
100 days. But as challenges go, in a weird way, I've found it easier than sort of like there's this thing called the 30-day suck less challenge where you make sure you practice every day, and there's like a special calendar that you fill in, and at the end the goal is that you suck less at playing the piano or the clarinet or whatever it is. And I don't think I managed that. So it's funny to me how it's a bigger challenge, but actually it's been easier in some ways.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned too that this may not be for everybody. And I think that's really important to recognize that everybody's songwriting process may be a little different. And so if someone listening, if you try this and it's not for you, that's okay. Don't feel like, oh, like this isn't for me. That makes me bad or whatever. It's not true. There's so many contests and challenges out there. And even for writing too, like I'm an author as well, and I'm trying to get an agent at the moment. And I did a challenge last year. It's called NaNoWriMo. It stands for National Novel Writing Month. And every November, authors from all over the world take a challenge to write at least 50,000 words a month, or they can set a higher goal of drafting a whole novel. And you're supposed to write all 30 days. And I did this last November and I drafted an entire book. At the time, it was 73,000 words in a month. I wrote every single day. And just doing that, with these kind of challenges, it makes you realize, like, number one, I can do this. Like you can tell yourself, I can't write a book in a month or I can't write a song in 10 days. But when you do it, you're proving to yourself, yes, I can do this. And number two, going back to something you said, like if somebody would come to you and say, I want a song about this tomorrow, you're going to feel more confident doing that because you have things to show for your work. You can look back on all of this and say, I wrote all these songs quickly. I can do it now. And it gives you more confidence.
Yeah, I think for me, I find it very difficult with anything not to think, what am I going to do next? And there's ideas for me of writing with, maybe finding 10 other writers who I don't know and writing with them. Um, and before I just would have gone, no, I don't want to do that because I don't like the idea. And now it's sort of like, yeah, that will be really difficult, but it will be quite a challenge. And the reality is, depending on what happens with the music industry over the next few years, the only way that any of us will make any reasonable money is through co-writing and writing for more established artists. So you do need to be able, if I don't know what artist you might pluck out of the air, but I keep saying Beyonce for some reason. I don't think I would probably write for Beyonce. But if Beyonce's people suddenly appeared and said, write 3 songs to be considered for her next album, you're not going to go, oh well, you know what? I'll get back to you in a year when I've got some new material. That's not going to work.
No.
So I think coming back to the rock and his muscles, if you're flexing those muscles, then you're going to be in a stronger position.
Hmm.
Do you see what I did there? That was quite clever. I like
Yes,
that.
it was. Oh my goodness. Well, it was a true honor having you on the show. I wish we could talk for another 50,000 hours, but we're coming to the end. But just to wrap up, what is one more short piece of advice that you would love to share with anybody who's struggling to be consistent with their work, no matter what they may be doing in life?
For me, I think it's that thing of remembering that you're in control of all of this. I After the episode with The Voice, I also sort of wondered whether I needed a manager and approached several people, and it didn't really go anywhere. And part of the conversations was that I was saying throughout my releases, I've tended to release something that's more mainstream and then something that's a bit more weird. And one of the managers was sort of like, "Yeah, no, that's a really bad idea." And I thought, well, that's a bad idea for you, but this is what I do, and that's what I intend to keep doing. Because that feels an interesting way of working for me. So we're not going to work together. End of. And not seeing that as a failure, but as this is my artistic mission, and I'm in control of it. So there's been times with this project where life things have got in the way, and I've had to say, this is actually going to be a 15-day song as opposed to a 10-day song. And thankfully, none of my Patreon supporters have asked for their money back. But it's meant that I'm in control of the creative project, and I'm in control of how I feel about it in a way that feels helpful and useful. So I think if there comes a point where you're not loving what you're doing, then it's completely fine to change what you're doing. And I think, as I said earlier, that's one of the strengths that we have as independent creators, whether that's in music or fiction or whatever. But often we tend to look at it from the other point of view of, I can't do this because I don't have the money, or I can't do this because this hasn't happened yet. When there's lots of things you can do in the meantime while you're waiting, or creating.
Yeah, absolutely
Creating, not
perfect.
waiting, Demi. You've just given me a
Yes,
new a
perfect.
new slogan.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Can you please share with everybody where they can find you online and check out all that you do?
Sure. My website is Reeves Corner, REEVESCORNER.co.uk, which is named after a sofa shop in the town that I come from. I don't sell sofas, but you can find out all about me there and find links to uh, where else I might be. I'm mainly on Instagram in terms of social media, so that's Instagram and Marcus_Reeves, I think it is. And then my Patreon, if you still want to sign up, you haven't missed anything. In fact, you're getting a better deal at this point, because for your small fee per month, you get access to loads of music straight away. That's patreon.com/Marcus Reeves, or just Google 10-day tunes, Marcus Reeves, or whatever, and I'm sure I'll appear somewhere. And I've got music on iTunes and Spotify and all the other digital shops that don't pay us any money. So feel free to find me there.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for joining me. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this incredible conversation with Marcus Reeves. And of course, until next time,
Stay
stay right
right
on
on
track.
track.